We are blessed, alhamdulillah, by the grace of God to be in this place coming together as believers. The believers are called to be a congregation. Before the Prophet ﷺ received revelations, Friday was Yawm al-Uruba. Friday was the day of Arabness. And Allah made it Yawm al-Jumu'ah, the day of gathering, which is an indication that this final message of the Abrahamic covenant is meant to bring humanity together in the divine purpose as he started. Inni ja'ilun fil ardi khalifa. I have put on this earth a caliph with a caliphate, and that person is Adam, our forefather, and we are all the children of Adam. We have to feel this sense of humanity. There is a brotherhood and sisterhood, a fellowship of human beings, that we are all connected from our souls that came from heaven and was brought with the angel to our mothers in our womb. And then here we are, born in the earth of many different tribes and nations, expected to come together to know one another so that we may understand each other and communicate to each other and build a better society. Specifically speaking, right now there is a ceasefire in Palestine. The way many people are choosing to take this is as though the battle has stopped and they've gone back to peace, as though there was peace. What has happened is the massive Goliath onslaught of a massive giant towards the power of an ant has stopped smashing down with his giant feet on top of the ant. But the ant is still trapped with no way to grow, to thrive, to have any comfort. Gaza is still a giant open-air prison. The West Bank is still becoming lesser and lesser Palestinian and more aggressive, hateful settlers moving into homes and displacing the people who've lived there for centuries. So there is not peace and has not been peace since 1948. And so as Muslims, we have to be very careful how we approach this issue. So that somebody might say, why Palestine? We have problems here in America, and that's true. We have problems here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Does it mean that we prioritize Palestinians over that, or that we equally work according to our capacity to alleviate the pain and suffering and injustices that everyone is facing, Muslim and non-Muslim? This is the call of Islam. But why fundamentally Palestine? Is it because it's our land? Is it because we Muslims own that land? No. إِنَّ الْأَرْضَ لِلَّهِ يُرِثُهَا مَا يَشَاءُ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ. It's not our land. We don't own the land. We don't own the shirt we're wearing on our back. Everything is Allah's. لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Everything in the heavens and earth belongs to Allah. We are using it, but how we use it. And when we say we, as a human race, is the issue. Palestine is being used wrong ever since it was become Israel. Ever since they gave it that name, Palestine has been misused, abused, mistreated, and oppressed because of this concept. And this land is not just like any other land. It is the Holy Land. Al-Ard al-Muqaddasata allati kataba Allahu lakum. Many modern characters are trying to use this verse in its false application. God had previously pulled the Israelites out of their oppression in Egypt and then decreed that they would come into this Holy Land. For which reason? To follow the Prophet's teachings, to promote the Prophet's teachings. And when you fail in promoting the Prophet's teachings, when you contradict the Prophet's teachings, you lose that special right And by the way, what I'm saying is not just my Muslim statement. There are many Orthodox rabbis across the world from various groups, not just the Nutella Carta, but True Torah, Jews, and many others, who are making this point that we as Jews have been divinely punished on this earth in many ways because we have left the Torah, because we have left the teachings of the prophets. That's their claim in their Saturday synagogue sermon that they're preaching to their people. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حولها. Glory be to the one who has taken his servant from the sacred mosque in Mecca to the mosque in Al-Aqsa, the further mosque, which we have blessed the area around it. Blessed how? Because it's the land in and of itself? No, it's the prophetic legacy that that land represents. In our theology, there were prophets sent to the corners of the earth. Many prophets. وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. Every nation has a prophet. وَإِن مِّنْ أُمَّةٍ إِلَّا خَلَا فِيهَا نَذِيرٌ. Every nation was sent someone. But there was one place where many prophets with many revelations, with many miracles were sent. And that is Jerusalem. That place cannot standardize injustice. إِنَّا أَنزَلْنَا التَّوْرَاةَ فِيهَا هُدًى وَنُورٌ يَحْكُمُ بِهَا النَّبِيُّونَ. Surah Al-Ma'idah. We revealed the Torah, and in it is guidance and light, and the prophets judged accordingly. What is guidance? Guidance is having a clarity of purpose and meaning that is in your best interest, and it is doing good in the world. Light, to distinguish between truth and falsehood, the clarity of vision. You cannot now take the message of the prophets and use it to oppress anyone. لَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا بِالْبَيِّنَاتِ وَأَنزَلْنَا مَعَهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْمِيزَانَ لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ. Surah Al-Hadid. Truly we have sent the messengers, all messengers, with clear proofs and evidences, with the scales of justice, so that the people could establish justice. That's why prophets were sent. That is the purpose of prophethood. When somebody takes a message of a prophet, whether they be ISIS or whether they be Israel, and they start saying, this is what it means to follow the prophets, this is the legacy of the prophets, and they institutionalize injustices, we stand in their face and say, you are wrong, and this is a travesty, and it must stop now. And we can't rest with a peaceful sleep until the legacy of the prophets is preserved. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ. The scholars have agreed that this verse in Surah An-Nahl is the fundamental verse of divine law. God commands to justice. وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ. God does not love the unjust, the oppressors. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. God will not guide the people of injustice. فَلَا عُدْوَانَ إِلَّا عَلَى الظَّالِمِينَ. There's no hostility allowed for a believer except against an oppressor. It's a fundamental trait. You could easily say that the emphasis on establishing justice and eradicating injustice is equally mentioned in the Quran as salah, as your daily prayers. But where the true faith comes out of the believer, many people are struggling just to pray, which is something I do for a better connection with God so that I can grow in my spirituality. Many people are struggling just to believe and connect with God. May Allah guide us all to the straight path and give us richness in our purpose and meaning, that we may connect with that force which causes the rhythm of our heartbeat. And every breath that we take, everything we look at, every morsel we ate, every sip we drank, came from that Creator who we need to go back to every day. But that should be easy for any believer to pray 5 times a day. That actually should be easy. And if it's not, there's a fundamental issue of faith going on. It's not an issue of time, because we have 24 hours. Nobody can tell me we cannot gather 1 hour of the day to split up between 5 prayers and connect with God. There's an issue of faith. Do I really believe I need to do this because of God, or is there really a God? But then once you reach that level of connection with God, you are now an agent of truth and justice, of divine knowledge. And it is an obligation on every single Muslim to know the plight of our black brothers and sisters here in Charlotte who have been oppressed for day one, 4 centuries long. To feel their pain, to understand their plight. Our Latino brothers and sisters in humanity who've been abused, humiliated, and oppressed in their desire to come to a place that has plenty of room and resources to work hard to establish a life for their family. As opposed to those Europeans who came here and genocidally wiped out people, and when they wanted, historically till this day, citizenship, it came like that. We have to feel the pain of the women of our society who we still see are treated as second class, and still see the permeating value is to her physical appearance rather than her intellectual and spiritual and moral commitment to society. We have to feel all of that, and we have to be on the front lines of supporting the needs and the plight of those people. But we cannot give up on the legacy of the prophets and the homeland of the prophets. So what is the problem over there? The problem is called Zionism. The problem is not Jews. We do not have a problem with Jews. There were maybe 2-3% of the people living in Palestine for centuries were Jews. Many rabbis gave them a hard time because the majority, vast majority of historical Judaism, of the rabbinical order of religious, said God had condemned them to exile, to leave that land because of their failures. That's a standard Orthodox, classic, Salafi traditional belief among Jews. And so when many went back, they were like, oh, you guys are sellouts. This is not allowed for you. But there are other people, Muslim and Christian, that were there. Marhaban bikum, ya ahl al-kitab. Brothers and sisters in humanity, people of the book, you're welcome here. There was no problem at all with any Jews living there. Jews on the Crusades were equally targets as Muslims. They wanted to wipe out anyone who is not Christian, and they wanted to move out anyone who was not Christian from their lands unless they converted. So where did large communities of Jews find a safe place? In the caliphate, in the theocracy of the Islamic theologically based state. They said, you're a Jew, you're welcome to live here. Until they started this project, there were large communities of Jewish populations in North Africa, in Iraq, still in Iran. There are tens of thousands of Jews who choose to live in Iran, Orthodox Jews. And they have no problem, have found no problem. And they say Iran is their main adversary in Israel. But those Jews there do not ever complain of any human rights problems in Iran, because Islam is not against Jews. Zionism, as defined by the Webster's Dictionary, an international movement originally for the establishment of a Jewish national and religious community in Palestine, and later the support of modern Israel as a state. That's Zionism. The dictionary's definition, the Western Webster Dictionary, since I was a kid, Webster was the one. Second grade, look the word up. Where? Webster. It is saying that the beginning of this movement was to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. And yet I have met some very disingenuous folk amongst aggressive Zionist people that tried to argue to me that there was never such thing as a Palestine. This is the talk of genocide. This is the talk of ethnic cleansing. This guy, Theodor Herzl, did not speak Hebrew. He did not speak Yiddish. He was born in Hungary in 1860, and he was very concerned about the widespread anti-Semitism in Europe. he noticed that most people do not like Jews where he lived and where he traveled. He was a journalist. He was a playwright. He was not a rabbi, not a scholar, not a practicing Jew at all. His first idea, anyone know? All Jews need to convert to Christianity. He went on the guy who founded Zionism, his first thought was Jews need to all just become Christians. Because he didn't really have a belief. He just felt that culturally that would support their future. But when he saw the strong pushback, he then thought longer, and he came up with this idea that was seen as insane and rejected by all Jews at first, specifically the Orthodox rabbis and all of the people of the religion. We need to establish a Jewish state where all Jews can go. And he made the very clever statement in 1890s. He made the point. He said, both many Jews who just want a place where they can thrive, as well as the anti-Semites who want to get rid of the Jews, will support this idea. We will make the ones who are against us seem to be our biggest supporters so that they can get rid of us. That's the founder of Zionism's own words in his own book. And this is where it started. Again, the rabbis said, you can't do this, specifically in Palestine, because we are not allowed to establish Israel until the Messiah comes, which they don't believe is Jesus, so they will have a hard time finding that Messiah. And they're waiting for him, and when he comes, he will establish Israel, and there will be world peace. When Jesus comes back, what will happen? There will be world peace. There will be a world state. So that's going to happen. May Allah count us among those who follow him. The idea became reality through three events. During World War I, there were some prominent Jews who started to get together from all over Europe, in Sweden, in the Zionist Congress, and among the top of those was the Rothschild family from England. The Rothschilds are basically the founders of the modern banking industry. And their net worth, I think, today as a family is like $350 billion. So they were saying, let's negotiate a way to get a homeland. Now, they even discussed Uganda, Argentina. They discussed, they weren't, because they're not religious Jews. The people who established it were never religious. And that's not my claim. All Orthodox admit this point. It was a secular venture to deal with anti-Semitism. It was a racially cultural thing, not a religious thing. But it sought to use religion. And so then after World War I, there was the British mandate. After the World War I cleared, Ottomans have lost Palestine. They've conceded it. It's yours. So then the British took over. Immediately, the Balfour Declaration comes out, 1917, in which Balfour, the secretary of the British government, sends to Rothschild, I'm now responding to your request of a homeland potentially in Palestine, that we are hereby declaring a homeland for Jews in Palestine, 1917. Then after World War II and the Holocaust, the United Nations was formed, and one of their first orders of business was to set up a place for all Jews to go in Palestine. So in 1947, they announced that we will make a partition. Half will be Palestine, half will be Israel. And they wrote a map, and that map, I've seen it with my own eyes in New York in the UN building. It's still there on the wall because they've never changed that position. The official international position is that that land is two states, half Israel, half Palestine. That has never changed. But the PR campaign of Zionists have eradicated Palestine off any map that you can find outside of that place in the UN. It's Israel. And so it's important for us to know how to stand for justice based upon the facts. So then they had the War of Independence, 1948. In the War of Independence, they took over about 20% more land than the UN had originally given them. Supposedly, they're defending their right to have this half of Palestine. But they actually took over 20, 30% more of that in this defensive battle. And yes, the Arab armies did come. And yes, since the Balfour Declaration, they did have a problem and announced it, but they were never engaged by the world community as an actual partner in a discussion. That was never the case. Because as Herzl said, as they knew, anti-Semitism still exists, and let's give them a place. So then in the 1967 Six-Day War, the complete takeover and occupation of Palestine was established. And that's why they have controlled these maps, because they're saying, look, we're everywhere, we control everything. Our military, and they keep expanding in settlements. Now they're building walls. Whoever is telling you that there is going to be a two-state solution, it is my personal opinion that that is impossible. There's no way to make a two-state solution. They're going to have to come up with a way to get rid of Zionism and everybody live there peacefully, just as they did in South Africa, and respect equal rights to everyone and give right of return and reparations to the people who've been abused and exiled forcefully and oppressively. That's my opinion. There's many opinions. I'm not claiming to know the best. That's just the way I feel about it. Let's get a few things straight. To be anti-Zionist and opposed to Zionism, you are joining a swath of probably millions of Jews who are against Zionism, from Orthodox all the way to Reform. And they're saying, you have hijacked our religion and our identity as a people and tied it into a political movement of establishing a state. And we don't think that's right. So there's nothing wrong with opposing Zionism. There's nothing wrong with stating the facts that the Zionist lobby is very influential and asserts itself in worldwide government and worldwide media. We're not saying Jews control the media. We're saying Zionists influence media to support their narrative falsely, in an affront to journalistic integrity, and in an affront to the concepts of democracy, freedom, and human rights. That's what we are saying, and that is a fact. And we're joining many Jews in that statement. Those politicians who have seen this oppressive state through, they've been using Judaism and Jewish people as an identity in a similar way to ISIS, but with a much more sophisticated PR campaign, with a much more deeply well thought out way to get this accepted by others. I've met many Muslims who feel disadvantaged in an awkward situation talking to people about the facts of Palestine and Israel. And because I've run out of time, I had a few points to mention. The Quran, it warns us. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يُعْجِبُكَ قَوْلُهُ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. This is Surah Al-Baqarah. It's a long ayah. In essence, what it means, you'll meet people that seem very sincere and that what they're saying is very truthful and honest and establishing the fact. But then you see the actual fruits of what they do when you leave that conversation. It seems like, oh, wow, I feel like maybe I'm anti-Semitic here. They've been through the Holocaust, how dare I, I feel really bad. They're threatening me as a person who works here or whatever. Maybe I should just stop on this issue. But then you see the effects of what they're defending, and you're like, no way. There's no way. I am ready to go into my grave knowing that I stood with the prophets, that I stood with truth and justice, and I did not care what happened to me in this life if I spoke the truth. Because if you don't, and you are part of the permeating disgrace of prophethood and the legacy of prophets, that is against your shahada as a believer. It's a very serious issue. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروه فإنه هو الغفور الرحيم. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. In conclusion, very simply, the need to establish justice, the need to care for the welfare of human beings who are being mistreated is probably more so emphasized in the Quran than your salah. Because what does it mean that you pray a daily salah? And so between you and your Creator, you have a nice little connection. But then around you is all this evil and corruption and oppression, and you have nothing to say or do about it. What does that mean? It's hypocrisy. Our claim to faith requires action. It requires truth, well-studied truth, scripture and reality as it is lived, and joining between the two in a reasonable way, prioritizing with wisdom, not being all emotional and combative without any sense of principle or purpose. We are called to this. We have to have our knowledge. We have to have our facts. We have to have our genuine sincerity of seeking divine pleasure. It's not a tribal issue. It's not the Muslims versus the Jews. It's not even the Palestinians against the Israelis. It is truth versus falsehood. It is oppression versus the oppressor. This is what we're talking about. And these concepts are fluid in the Quran. And the Muslims and the Seerah, that was the whole issue. Where would we be? Would any of you be sitting here? If the Muslims were all content amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, praying their salah and doing their dhikr. You can imagine why they like those type Muslims. You can imagine why those Muslims get in the power players of our ummah who have failed us in treachery for centuries. You can imagine why they like to see this flowing robes and thing and the dhikr, calling people to pray daily salah, which we all know we should pray daily salah, and doing nothing about intellectually growing with a spiritual purpose to affect change that is positive and good, healthy and wholesome in the world around us. That is the religion. Don't let it get twisted. Ya Allah, we ask you to inspire us, to increase us in faith and understanding and wisdom. We ask you to give us strength. We ask you to support us and give us contentment, to give us patience, fortitude, perseverance. We ask you to join our hearts together, bring our hearts on a common word of the truth of your mission as you sent in your prophets. Ya Allah, we ask you to forgive us for all of our weaknesses. We ask you to support all of the people in the Palestinian cause who are establishing justice and truth in the Holy Land. We ask you to support all of our brothers and sisters in humanity who are going through oppression. We ask you to be with all of those martyrs who were unjustly murdered and killed in this recent incursion and before and all over the earth. Ya Allah, we ask you to guide us and make the straight path clear for us and make our last words and our last actions confirming that there is no deity other than you. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.